And we're back. Hello, welcome into another sort of breaking news episode here. My name is Connor Riley of DawgNation. We are talking about the latest news regarding Georgia. We broke in earlier this morning to talk about Christian Miller staying at Georgia, but there's been even bigger news since then. We're hopping on with you guys here around lunchtime on Thursday. Georgia lands a quarterback out of the transfer portal. That would be Jaden Rashada. This is a name a lot of fans know, and it completes something that Kirby Smart has wanted to do for quite some time. The Bulldogs now have 4 scholarship quarterbacks as the Bulldogs land Rashada out of Arizona State. Rashada has 4 years of eligibility remaining. He does not expect to be the starter for Georgia this year. We're going to get into all of what it means for the Georgia quarterback room here, why it was made, what it means for guys like Gunnar Stockton and Ryan Puglisi moving forward, what it says about Rashada that he wants to come here. But Georgia adds another transfer quarterback. This is now the 8th transfer portal player, I believe, that Georgia has landed or added to its roster. 6 coming out on the offensive side of the ball, 2 on the defensive side of the ball. You saw all but one of those guys take part in G-Day with Ben Urasek, the Stanford transfer, being the one other player that will join the team this summer with Jaden Rashada here. But for a long time, Kirby Smart has made it very, very clear that he wants to get to 4 scholarship quarterbacks. And in doing so, you know that it's potentially going to ruffle some feathers. And I think Smart has done as good a job as he can, not just making players on his own team aware of this. You've heard Gunnar Stockton sort of talk about knowing that, hey, they want to add a 4th scholarship quarterback, but surrounding and putting that room filled with guys who aren't afraid to compete. Carson Beck, when he came in, that same offseason when Carson signed as a 2020 quarterback, Georgia brought in JT Daniels and they brought in Jamie Newman there. And Carson still stayed. And Carson's going to be the starter this year. And I think it's important to start there. If all goes according to plan, Jaden Rashada will not start a game this season for Georgia. He will not play a meaningful snap this season for the Georgia Bulldogs. Carson Beck is unquestionably still the guy for Georgia at the quarterback position. And I think that's why so much of this move is one geared towards the future. I think if everything goes well this season, Carson Beck, this time next year, we'll be getting ready to hear his name called on the first day of the 2025 NFL draft. And so I think Rashada made this move to be the future starting quarterback at the University of Georgia. I think that's the most important thing there. He's now going to have a year to learn this system, work as a backup, work with the scout team, get reps, learn what Mike Bobo wants in this offense, work with other players in the Georgia scheme, and build a chemistry and a connection there. I think that this is something where if you look at the transfer quarterbacks that have had a ton of success, Joe Burrow most famously, Jaden Daniels, formerly an Arizona State quarterback who won the Heisman Trophy last year, they all made massive, massive jumps in their second year with those programs. And so the hope is that this year you do get some of the uncomfortableness and issues that come with transferring into the program out of the way. And that way, if he is able to win the starting quarterback job, he sort of is able to hit the ground running, like I think we saw Carson Beck do last season after spending his time developing in the Georgia quarterback system. But it's not guaranteed either that Jaden Rashada ultimately ends up being the starting quarterback for Georgia, because the Bulldogs have a guy in Gunnar Stockton who has, I think, a pretty big leg up on Rashada in terms of comfort and comfortability in this Georgia system. Stockton is entering his 3rd year in the program. He was asked earlier this spring about the potential of adding a transfer quarterback. He acknowledged it. He welcomed it. He's ready for competition. I think that this is a guy who is very comfortable in his own skin. He knows coming to Georgia, you're going to have to compete for starting jobs and starting playing time. It's worth remembering Gunnar Stockton committed to Georgia after Brock Vandagriff had signed with Georgia in the 2021 recruiting class. Vandagriff was a 5-star quarterback, a major target for Georgia in that cycle. And Stockton didn't care. Stockton wanted to come to Georgia. He wanted to play at Georgia. And most importantly, he wanted to put in the work that was necessary to being the starting quarterback at Georgia. He's going to have to continue to do that, and now he's going to have to battle alongside Jaden Rashada, not just to one day be the starting quarterback for Georgia, but I think this season be the backup quarterback. And I think this battle now moving forward gets a lot more interesting. And one of the big things with Carson Beck and his own development was that in that 2022 season where he was the unquestioned backup quarterback to Stetson Bennett, you think back to that Vanderbilt game where Georgia sent him out there and really let him throw the football. And I think his performance that day opened up a lot of eyes to what he could possibly be. I think Georgia is hoping that a similar type moment happens this year for either Stockton or Rashada. It's important to note Rashada has thrown more pass attempts than Gunnar Stockton. I believe it's 82-19. Rashada did start 3 games this past season at Arizona State. That Arizona State program in a very tough spot post Herm Edwards. A lot of turnover there. It was Kenny Dillingham's first season there in Tempe, Arizona. And so he is going from essentially an old Honda Civic to now driving a potential Ferrari at Georgia. He's going to have to learn how to do it. He's going to have to, to use an F1 term, he's going to have to be the reserve driver before he steps in on race day for Georgia potentially next year. But that's enough F1 talk for this Thursday afternoon. And I think as he battles Stockton, look, Rashada was a higher rated recruit, and we're going to touch on his Florida recruitment here a little bit and everything. Gunnar Stockton could very well win this job, and this time next year, we are once again talking about Jaden Rashada looking to go elsewhere. It's the reality, in my opinion, of the modern day transfer portal. You saw that the NCAA has allowed players to transfer unlimited amount of times, and as we get the light back on, there we go. And so moving forward, I think again, this is something Gunnar Stockton was always knew was going to be the case. Rashada, in my opinion, is by far the most talented quarterback to enter the transfer portal, or at the very least, the one with the highest upside. Once again, 4 years of eligibility remaining. And so this is a move, again, geared towards the future. And Gunnar Stockton right now is sort of seen as the future of this quarterback room. I know they have Ryan Puglisi as well. It'll be interesting to see how this impacts his development. But similar to Gunnar Stockton, I don't think Ryan Puglisi is going to be bothered by this move. This is a guy that was willing to come into the same recruiting class as Dylan Raiola. So I don't think that the idea of competition is something that is going to frighten Puglisi in the slightest. They have now stacked this quarterback room with Gunnar Stockton, Ryan Puglisi, and the next year, Ryan Montgomery as well, a 2025 four-star quarterback, who wants to come in and compete and play alongside the best. It's not easy to be the starting quarterback at Georgia. Carson Beck had to wait 3 years. Stetson Bennett had to leave, come back, get turned on, not just by the fan base, but by the Georgia coaching staff as well. Todd Monken did not envision him being the starting quarterback for Georgia, and he went on to win 2 national championships. It is not easy, and I think Gunnar Stockton knows that. I think Jaden Rashada knows that. I think that's why he is making this move now, and similarly why Georgia is making this move now, instead of maybe waiting another year, seeing what type of player becomes available in the transfer portal window next winter after the season, because traditionally we have seen more quarterback movement in the December window than necessarily in the April window. So I think that's something to monitor there as well. There is a rather juicy angle to this all as well, and I'm sure Brandon Adams would love to jump in on this and is almost certainly going to when everyone gets back from the DawgNation cruise. But there's a Georgia-Florida aspect now of this that becomes so interesting in the one-day event, that Rashada does become the starting quarterback, because there was a time that Rashada was seen as a Florida Gator starting quarterback potentially. Rashada was long coveted by Florida in the 2023 recruiting cycle, first commits to Miami, then flips to Florida and ultimately signs with Florida. But after a financial deal with a Gator Collective, I believe actually called the Gator Collective, fell through, Rashada ends up leaving Florida, spending his first year at Arizona State. And there's an aspect of this that potentially, if he is the ultimate starter, all becomes so interesting, given what I think Rashada potentially meant to that Florida program. Now, obviously, they've moved on. They had Graham Mertz last season, and he played fairly well. I would say he maybe even exceeded what expectations were for him coming over from Wisconsin. And now they have 5-star freshman quarterback DJ Lagway, who is seen as the future of the quarterback position there. I think that there is a world in 2025 where you have Jaden Rashada at Georgia, led by head coach Kirby Smart, and on the other sideline, you have DJ Lagway, led by Billy Napier. Now, it's also not a guarantee that Billy Napier makes it through this season with how difficult Florida's schedule sets up to be. But I think with how things went for Rashada at Florida, the way that thing fell apart, I think actually is a big reason why he is ultimately at Georgia right now, because he has understood the NIL aspect of college football and seeking perhaps that instant gratification, and how that can leave you unhappy or can leave you with things that doesn't necessarily, lead you to do the things that you want to do. I think his move to Georgia, again, similarly, it is a long-term play. It is a development play. He ultimately wants to continue to get better. It's hard to argue against what Georgia has done in recent years. You're going to be contending for national championships. If you're a starting quarterback there, you have a chance on the back end to make a lot of NIL money. And so with all that in mind, again, I think the big reason that Kirby Smart made this move, one, in 2024, it gives Georgia better quarterback depth. They have a lot riding on Carson Beck this season. And we touched on Christian Miller in the news, the defensive line earlier. This might be the first time where I think Georgia has built this team around a quarterback to be its best player. Now, Carson could well be its best player. Could also be Malachi Starks in the safety position. Michael Williams had a really strong spring at outside linebacker. This is a really, really talented offensive line. And as we saw in the spring game, I think it was hard not to be impressed with what you saw from the wide receivers. But in the unfortunate event that Carson Beck does suffer an injury, knock on some wood there, I think you have a guy that has come in and played some before, played at a Power 5 level at Arizona State, granted very different from what he's going to be experiencing in the SEC. But you have a guy with some real experience, and you have a guy that is, at the very least, you would expect to push and get the best out of Gunnar Stockton as well. Ryan Puglisi deserves mention as well, the freshman quarterback. And so Kirby Smart is a steadfast believer in competition breeding excellence. I think this only further backs that up. You look in the defensive line, they had a guy like Xavier McLeod. The hope is that he's going to push Jordan Hall and Christian Miller to an even higher level there. On the offensive side of the ball, they go add London Humphreys. They go add Colby Young. The hope is that those guys make Ra Thomas, Dylan Bell, and Anthony Evans even better players. And so I think you saw that this spring at the running back position, for example. Trevor Etienne comes in. We all have really high expectations for him. And Roderick Robinson goes out and has a really strong spring and has positioned himself, in my opinion, to look like a guy that can help this team this season. But I think the addition of Jaden Rashada speaks a lot more to what Georgia is ultimately hoping happens in 2025. I think this brings some long-needed stability to the quarterback position. Ever since striking out on Arch Manning in the 2023 quarterback cycle, Georgia's been trying to play catch-up in terms of filling out their quarterback room. Again, we have heard time and time again that Kirby Smart wants to get to 4 scholarship quarterbacks. They now have that in Jaden Rashada on this Georgia team, along with Carson Beck, Gunnar Stockton, and Ryan Puglisi. But what this does also is it sets you up moving forward, because in the likely event that Carson Beck leaves for the NFL next year, and he does still have 2 years of eligibility left, but I think just about everyone believes this coming season will be his last at Georgia. Moving forward, Beck moves on. Ryan Montgomery, 2025 quarterback, steps in. You realistically stay at 4 scholarship quarterbacks for the 2025 season. So you have some idea moving forward of real stability at this quarterback position. Georgia also holds a quarterback commitment from Jared Curtis, the 2026 4-star quarterback. He might be a 5-star quarterback depending on which ranking service you look at there. But for a long time, Georgia has had some instability at this quarterback position. Really, over the course of the last month, it has locked into place, at least as much as it can in this modern day and age when things can change so quickly. I think Christian Miller showed us that last night, going from entering the transfer portal to this morning announcing that he is staying at the University of Georgia. You land Jared Curtis in 2026. You land Ryan Montgomery in 2025. You decide we're no longer going to pursue Juju Lewis in the 2025 recruiting cycle. And now you have your transfer quarterback in Jaden Rashada. It sets up for, as much as you can have in the current day and age in college football, a clear path of succession for the Georgia quarterback room going forward, at least in terms of numbers. I don't think we know right now who's going to be Georgia's next starting quarterback. I think it could well be Gunnar Stockton. It could well be Jaden Rashada. It could even well be Ryan Puglisi in terms of the arm talent that we have seen from him so far. So we're still a long, long way from knowing definitively what Jaden Rashada brings to this team. But for a 2024 aspect, he provides quality depth. He's a guy that has played real snaps, and he has 4 years of eligibility remaining, redshirting in his first year at campus or on campus at Arizona State. And so he has time to develop and get better. And I think one thing that might take a little bit of an adjustment here, for so long we had that extra COVID year of guys who could use it and come back. And so you never really knew where players stood in terms of eligibility. We're getting away from that. I think this is the last real year where you have a lot of those guys taking advantage of that COVID year and sort of the scholarship numbers being what they are, and thus that'll normalize a little bit going forward. Obviously, the transfer portal is always going to have some impact on that. Per the unofficial count, Georgia is now at 87 scholarship players, but in reality, I actually think they're currently at 85. So it wouldn't surprise me if Georgia sticks. You don't see any more players leave via the transfer portal. I don't think there's anyone out there worth adding via the transfer portal right now other than Jaden Rashada. So in terms of future roster moves for Georgia, this might very well be it. So Georgia, spring transfer portal window, you knew Kirby Smart was going to want to go out there and get a quarterback. I believe he has done that in getting Jaden Rashada. This is a guy with, again, 4 years of eligibility left, but also has some real college experience. Again, games were against, I think, Southern Utah. I know Arizona was one of them, and I want to say it was maybe like Oklahoma State was the other game. 1 and 2 in those games, 4 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Not exactly the greatest performances in the world, but he was a true freshman starting for one of the least talented teams in the Power Five. So I think with Rashada, again, this is a long-term, a future play. And the hope is that it pushes everyone in the Georgia quarterback room ahead. It makes Gunnar Stockton better. It makes Ryan Puglisi better. It makes Carson Beck better. And it allows Carson to do a few more things now because Georgia's quarterback room is deeper. I think one of the big takeaways that I had coming out of spring practice is when you watch Georgia down there and then they're going through spring warmups and Ryan Puglisi's out with a knee injury. They only had 2 healthy scholarship quarterbacks. And I think as you saw in the 2019 season when that was the case with Jake Fromm and Stetson Bennett, it really handcuffs you in terms of what you're allowed to do. And I think you saw a lot last year. Carson Beck being able to create with his legs, I think was important in him picking up third downs and keeping the chains moving. I think, if you only have 2 scholarship quarterbacks or 2 healthy scholarship quarterbacks, you're not so willing to let him run. You're telling him to protect himself. You don't want to expose him to hits. And so I think this is going to further allow Georgia to employ its full offense and do what it wants to do at the quarterback position in 2024. That's going to be with Carson Beck as the starter. I would be shocked if Jaden Rashada starts a game this year for Georgia. And the only way that I could potentially see that happening is in the event that Carson Beck somehow gets hurt and that Rashada somehow passes Gunnar Stockton, which right now I would still put Gunnar Stockton ahead of Jaden Rashada on the Georgia quarterback depth chart. Because, again, this is a guy who's gone through 3 spring practices with Georgia. He's very familiar with Mike Bobo since Bobo recruited him when Bobo was the offensive coordinator at South Carolina. This is a guy that has been with Georgia for a while, and I think that he has the leg up right now in that competition. But the reason Rashada makes this move now is so that this time next year, going into spring practice 2025, he is at least able to somewhat close the gap a little bit. Because the big thing with Gunnar moving forward, he just needs more reps, more live action reps. He's taken countless reps in practice, worked the scout team, done all of that. But I think moving forward, it's how does he continue to get those reps? So in an early game this year against Tennessee Tech, if Georgia's able to get a big lead on someone like a Clemson or a Kentucky, and it sounds, imagine saying 3 years ago that Georgia could get a big lead on someone like Clemson, but I think that speaks to where Georgia is as a program now. What does it look like if Gunnar Stockton is getting reps late in those games there? So I think moving forward, that is where things go. So we'll open up some questions here and sort of see where you guys are thinking and whatnot. Crystalline White, no, Gunnar does not have a COVID year. He signed as a 2022 prospect, and the COVID year guys are all 2020 or earlier prospects. I do agree with you, though. Georgia's quarterback room is in a much better place now. I think it looks similar to what Ohio State has, where you have a guy like Will Howard, who you bring in from Kansas State, who's going to be their starter this year. But then long-term, you have an Aaron Nolan, you have a Julian Sayin. I think you feel good about what you have there moving forward. William Camacho brings up the other big news of the day. Christian Miller announces that he is going to be staying at Georgia. We touched on that prior to today's episode of DawgNation Daily there. Miller enters the transfer portal last night, then ends up staying. He will end up staying at Georgia. Brian Hudson, no. Andrew Paul, transfer running back, has not announced where he will be going next. Let's see. Thoughts, comments, questions. Yeah, there are a lot of comments in here about Gunnar Stockton. I'll be interested in seeing how this impacts his development and what comes next moving forward. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how it goes. Yeah, Kirby Smart understands what this move would do. I think he has stacked this quarterback room along with this roster as a whole with guys who aren't afraid of competition. I think that is one of the bedrock principles of the Georgia program. Look, they say it's not for everyone. And if you think you're going to be handed a job, this is just not the program for you. So I think Rashada knows that coming here, knowing that if he's ultimately going to be the starting quarterback, he is going to have to put in a lot of work. Alex Waller, I think this is true, not just of Rashada, but any player that you take via the transfer portal. There is always some risk in adding a guy via the portal because I think it's fair to wonder, well, okay, why is this guy leaving some other program? I believe all 8 of the transfers that Georgia has taken this offseason are coming from other Power 5 programs. They were all good enough to play elsewhere. So you wonder perhaps why they're coming to the University of Georgia. And yeah, Henry brings this up on YouTube. Look, Jaden Rashada, I believe by at least 247 was viewed as a 5-star prospect. This guy has very strong physical tools. And is a guy that has a lot of upside in his game. He's going to learn, and that hasn't necessarily been the worst thing for Georgia. You see the way that Carson Beck has developed. I think they're banking on something similar here with Jaden Rashada and the way that goes moving forward. So we'll probably leave it there for today. Cody Chafins and I are going to be with you guys tomorrow morning, sort of recapping first night of the NFL draft. We'll probably touch on Rashada a little bit, any other news that I'm sure is now going to sprout up over the course of today. You also have the NFL draft later tonight. We have an episode of DawgNation at Large that was pre-recorded, some really great stuff in there from myself and Kaylee Manziel. And then obviously, as you touched on, you got the first day of the NFL draft. We're going to have content for you guys throughout the day rolling, discussing everything from who might go where to the latest news, notes, and what everyone is saying. Brock Bowers expected to be taken in the first round. Amarius Mims expected to be taken in the first round. And then obviously as well, potentially Ladd McConkey sneaking into the back half of the first round. Plenty to watch for today. A ton of news already, and it's going to be a long night. We're going to be up well past midnight, burning the midnight oil. So glad I was able to jump on and talk to you guys a little bit about the biggest news of the day so far. Arizona State quarterback Jaden Rashada to transfer from Arizona State to Georgia. He visited Georgia earlier this week. It gives Kirby Smart his 4th scholarship quarterback at last and sets up Georgia's quarterback room to, I think, be a position of strength moving forward, not just in the 2024 season, but in 2025 and beyond as well. So for this being a DawgNation production, my name is Connor Riley. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Big news of the day, Jaden Rashada commits to UGA.